Has anyone tried to do WebSockets in Django?
A little bit.
How'd it go? Not well. Yeah. So that's because Django basically works like this. There's a browser. It sends a request. Oh yeah, let me. Yeah. It sends a request to Django. Right. That's an HTTP. Django calls your view. This is a request object. That's a response object, and then this returns a response back to the browser. Right. Request comes in. Django does some stuff to convert HTTP to an object. Calls your view. Your view comes back out. Right. WebSockets don't work like that. WebSockets are a continuous bidirectional channel between the browser and the server, so this just straight up doesn't work. So what request does, so remember what this looks like, so I'm gonna erase it. What request does is basically completely change the entire architecture of how Django works. So I'm gonna put a little thing here, and we'll come back to that. It's cool. But what happens now is that channel. The request comes in on a request channel, which connects to Django, and the response comes back on a response channel. So far so good. You have a view down here, right? So far it's the same, but you can also now create additional channels between the browser and not your view anymore. So over here, go alone. We can now have bidirectional channels, say a WebSocket, which calls channel handler. So now you can have bidirectional communication. Of course, what this means is Django can't use WSGI anymore because WSGI is also request-response based. So you now need a separate thing to handle connections to the browser. And that thing is actually called Daphne. So, I'm gonna have to unlock it. So let me show you a quick example of what this code is going to look like. And this is all just directly from the documentation, which is at channels.readdocs.org, of course. Where else would you put documentation? Let's just skip down. I'm going to skip some setup stuff here. So here is the example here is a chat server, right? So here is what happens when a socket connects, right? So this looks pretty similar to a view. You define a function, it takes, instead of a request, it takes a message. And notice that it doesn't return a response anymore, but it does a thing with a group. Groups are, let's ignore groups for a minute. And just like you have HTTP routes, you now have channel routes. So this is a channel routing when you get the WebSocket connect channel, call the WSAdd function. And so you can hook up a disconnect, and here is sort of the most interesting one, which is the message. That's every time a message is received on the WebSocket channel. And so again, it just takes a message object, and you can see that messages have content similar to a request content, and you can see you can hook up multiple channels. So channel handlers receive a message, and rather than returning, they don't return anything, because remember, this is a sort of bidirectional channel system. Instead, what they do is write to one or more channels. So if you wanted to have one-to-one communication between two users, you would just have a channel for each user and you'd write to that channel. In this case, we're doing group chats. So channels has this concept of groups of sockets. And so when a user connects, you would add them to the group. And then every time you send a message to that group, it's going to be broadcast to every WebSocket that's listening on that channel. So what's really cool about this is it's not, you get WebSockets for free. It works out of the box. Like, it's just very simple. You know, this is literally all the code you need to do a real-time chat server in Python. And you would need all the front-end stuff and use whatever JavaScript framework is popular these days. But the back end could really be this simple. But you can also define your own channels. So there's some predefined channels, WebSocket channels, but you could use this for any form of asynchronous communication that you wanted to do within your application. So where you might have in the past used something like Celery, say, to run a task later after the request is done, you could now use channels to do that natively within Django. Trying to think if there's anything else that I should talk about. There's
So how are those different processes, or those threads, or
yes, okay, yeah, process model is good to talk about. So this is going to make deploying Django a bit more complicated, and that's kind of one of the downsides. And that's why I hope that people will start giving it a try to see like just how much more difficult. So right now you just need a WSGI server to run Django, but with channels you're going to need a few things. You're going to need to be running your front end, a pool of front end servers. That's Daphne. A cool note is that, so this is written in Python, but there's no reason that it has to be written in Python. And in fact, Andrew is planning on writing a Go version just to see what the performance differences might be. There's some other frameworks in other dynamic languages that have had a lot of success getting faster by using a faster initial connection server. So it's kind of cool. And the protocol here is just JSON. It will probably eventually be a standard. Andrew's calling it ASGI, but that's dependent on like people agreeing. And these messages are passed through a message bus. Django will ship with support. The primary one you'll want to use is a Redis bus. It'll ship with support for a database bus, but that won't be very fast. And then there's also an in-memory bus so that manage.py run server still works locally like you expect it to. But for deployment, you'll have to run some Redis now, or any other message buses as they're added. And then your views and your channel handlers are going to be running in separate processes, potentially spread across multiple machines. So instead of managing a pool of web servers, now you have to manage front-end server, back-end server, and some message bus, Redis, something. So it gets a little more complex. Django is going to continue to work in like classic mode, original Coke. So if you're not doing any asynchronous stuff, you just keep running Django and it keeps working. Channels will kind of be used behind the scenes, but you won't see them, and it'll just use the in-memory message passing. Yeah. So yeah, as you can see in the docs, there's some transparent support for authentication. So if the user, whatever authentication backend you're using for your web views will also work for your WebSocket views. It's semi-transparent. There'll be a decorator right now. It's called channel session user from HTTP. It's a little gross, but yeah. There's some notes in the docs on how to deploy it and how to scale it. There's the spec about the communication layer. Some interesting stuff. The way that the message bus works is a little different from the way that like Celery, you might expect Celery to work. Django's channels are guarantee at most once delivery, which is a little bit unusual. It's not guaranteed delivery. Channels expects that some requests might be dropped, but it does guarantee that a message only gets delivered once if it's delivered at all. This is different from like RabbitMQ, which has varying, you can have guaranteed delivery, or you can have at least once delivery, where you're guaranteed to get the message at least once, but maybe multiple times. That's super bad for stuff like WebSockets. So Django's not going to do that. What's going to happen? How is this going to get into Django? So right now, this works right now. Pip install channels and play with it, see how it works. The plan is, the last plan of record was to integrate it with into Django 1.10, which will be the next release. I don't actually know if that's still on track. There hasn't been a lot of people who have tried this yet, and so I suspect that there's kind of a chicken and egg situation where it shouldn't go into Django until people try it, and people probably won't try it until it's in Django. And so if you want a pretty easy way to contribute to the future of Django, try channels, give Andrew feedback. And he doesn't know that I just asked you all to do that, so nicely, please, give him feedback. But yeah, I'm tremendously excited. I should be really clear, I have nothing to do with this other than being a big fan. Most of the hard work has been Andrew's. I think this is what is going to take Django, give Django the chance of living another 10 years. And I'm really excited about it, so I hope you'll check it out.
Thank you. Okay, so I know you're hungry.